There is, and there's new spectrum that will be made available by the Government of Canada. There's some spectrum that's being used for television now that will be switched to other applications. Some of the new spectrum that will be released, the 700 megahertz spectrum, could be very good spectrum for rural communities. Just the physical, I'm not an engineer, but I've read a lot about this in the last few months. The physical attributes to this spectrum enables it to travel more distances and provide a lot of data. And that's why it was used first. That's my understanding. And therefore could be very good for rural communities. And the Government of Canada will have to decide how it uses this spectrum. Spectrum in Canada costs a lot of money for cell phone and wireless users. Last year, the industry invested over $4 billion to acquire new spectrum. And the price of spectrum in Canada is one of the most expensive in the world. That means there's a competitive market and there's a desire to provide services. So that aspect is good. The cost, on the other hand, we feel as an industry that the government could use some of this revenue that they're getting from the industry and use it to enhance the networks and enhance the infrastructure for remote and unserved areas, and use it for public interest and public good. And by doing so, it would help consumers also, because when the industry invests $4 billion or $4.5 billion to buy spectrum, someone has to pay in the end. And in the end, the consumers bear some of that cost, there's no doubt, and businesses bear some of that cost. So if the government was to use some of that revenue to provide better service, and how they allocate spectrum in the future will have an impact on how the service is delivered. As well, just another word on spectrum. The spectrum that is used for wireless services in Canada accounts for about 1% of the available spectrum. But the fees paid for that 1% by the wireless industry account for 50% of all the fees paid for spectrum. So there's a demand. There's new spectrum coming on that will be available, hopefully sooner rather than later. And from my conversations with engineers that know, they'll forget more in one night about this than I'll ever know in my life, tell me that what they tell me is that this spectrum could be very valuable for rural and remote communities. My pleasure. Yes.
I wanted to thank you for the tips on, I guess, what I would call the criteria for success around the $225 million. That's important. But because of your work in Ottawa, do you have a sense of when the federal government may be really formally rolling out the criteria and those sorts of things? So we worry a little bit that it takes quite long to get that information so we can try to get access to those dollars.
I think the only other question would be harder to answer is when the election is going to be. The government and the conversations that I had personally with ministers and deputy ministers and key officials is they want to roll this out quickly. The government clearly senses the urgency. That's why they've taken these unprecedented measures to invest this type of money, not only for this project, but the rest of the stimulus package. They've asked for some additional leeway to be able to spend $3 billion quickly. Now, I think we should all work to convince the government to use some of that immediate $3 billion to be used towards the 225 to roll this out quickly. And the reason I believe this is rolling out broadband, and if even more so if it's mobile wireless in some cases, it's an enabler for all other industries. And this is something that helps all other businesses. It's not a business well, it is, but it's not just the business of wireless and the business of broadband that we want to support. Is that this business supports all other businesses, whether it's farming, whether it's agriculture, whether it's a small business, whether you're selling software or engineering services, anything. It helps you. And it's a great equalizer to allow smaller communities to be able to compete. If you run a small business in a smaller community and you don't have access to high-speed internet, you are at a direct disadvantage compared to your competitors. And your competitors may not be in Toronto. They may be in Bombay, India. They could be anywhere in the world. So that's why we feel rolling this out is very important as part of the stimulus package. As far as the stimulus, I certainly understand the desire of governments to invest in traditional infrastructure, and we know that there's some infrastructure that needs upgrading. I'm sure you all have a list in your own communities of things that you'd like to see improved. At the same time, as I said earlier, and I want to repeat this point, we need to invest in the infrastructure that will make a difference as we get out of this recession. Not just investing money to put people to work. You know, the challenge we face today is not the same as the challenge that were faced by our grandparents in the 30s. Not all jobs and not all people need a shovel to get to work. Some people need information, and they work with knowledge, and being able to access and distribute and deploy information faster than before is essential. So that's why we're hoping that this will be done quickly. So the short answer after my long answer is the government tells us that they want to do this quickly. At the same time, they want to set rules so it's fair across the country.
I'll go off on a totally different prospect. New Brunswick's really being known today as an energy hub, and that's really becoming to the forefront, and some major projects happening. And we all know that strategically those projects have been being worked on by the province for many, many years. Back when the strategic development was going forward as to how that industry could move forward in New Brunswick, what role did broadband play in your planning back in the early?
Two things. The idea of broadband and having access to high-speed internet was part of the overall economic development strategy. New Brunswick is the second most rural province in Canada, and I felt at the time to be able to provide greater opportunities to all New Brunswickers, we needed to connect more New Brunswickers. And currently there's a world competition about the smartest communities in the world. There are 7 finalists. 2 of the finalists are from New Brunswick. Moncton, where I now reside, and Fredericton, where I used to live when I was Premier. So I'm proud of that fact, and that's a legacy of the work that's been done, not only by us, by our government when we were there, but the whole province, and how innovation has been embraced. So the broadband component was important, not only for the energy sector, but all the sectors. There are some important energy developments potential in the province of New Brunswick. We launched the concept of the Energy Hub, I believe it was back in 2001, at an energy conference similar to this, but was energy rather than broadband. And we launched the idea that southwest New Brunswick could be an energy hub. Now there's been a retrofit of a nuclear power plant that's underway. There's been some other energy projects. There's other proposals, but I think other elements need to be taken into account. My only word of advice to the government in place is they should not put one tax dollar in any of those projects. And if they sign any contracts where they have to buy any of this power, then it will become a burden on New Brunswickers. So, but broadband was a key component, not only for that sector, but for all sectors. And it's one component out of a complete strategy. Just having broadband won't be the magic solution, but not having broadband certainly puts you at a disadvantage. One last question for the road from anybody? Yes.
Thank you again for your wonderful speech this morning. I think it's interesting to note that about 6 years ago when the Liberal government was in power at the time, they announced that it was $100 million investment into a national broadband program, which was unfortunately canceled at that time. I wonder where we would be 6 years from now had that gone ahead. I guess my question to you now is, with the new funding that's come available, starting to see it's double plus what they were offering back then. Have you set any priorities to where those fundings may go? For instance, most of these people here are looking at implementing high-speed broadband in areas that it's currently not available. Is there a preference to that versus improving existing infrastructure such as
On your first point, we made decisions in New Brunswick when I was there to work for the federal government, regardless of whether the program was in place or not, to move ahead. We thought it was essential for us as a province. And today Recently, the government of New Brunswick announced that they would build on that, and they announced a program to connect 100%. So our program had connected 90% of households, 95% of businesses, 100% of government institutions. The government of New Brunswick announced recently they're launching a new investment phase to connect 100% of households in New Brunswick. I think it's a good move. So we support that. What the officials have told me is one of the things they're looking for is to reach people that don't have access now. And frankly, when you look at where government money can be used and used effectively, there's enough concentration of market in some areas of our country where you don't need government support to get the most sophisticated networks in the world. Other parts of the country, because of the geography, because of demographics and the market that is there, having that support to build the infrastructure becomes essential. And I think, based on what I've been told, that's what the government is looking at. I would certainly encourage them to consider reaching people that are not being reached now. I would also advise them not to make decisions based on one technology, because you may need more than one technology to reach those people. In some places it may be satellite, it may be wireless, it may be mobile wireless, it may be old-fashioned fiber. So you should not make it one technology. You should make it flexible to be able to reach the people you want to reach and increase. And if you reach more people and you can increase capacity and speed at the same time, great. If you can do more than one thing, we would encourage them also to consider mobile broadband, of course.